I, like I can only assume most people, discovered Marathon through Bungie's later games. It was that game that Bungie made before, their 90s shooter. If you're a bit older, you may know it as that one FPS game that was on Mac, when everybody else was playing Wolfenstein, Doom, Heretic, Hexen, and Duke 3D. There was also this other game on the side. It's always strangely been left out of discussion around these early shooters. It's that odd one out in the corner that isn't really mentioned. Being on the more obscure platform probably doesn't help. I mean, try to say the phrase Mac gaming nowadays without bursting out laughing. No. But it's true that the game is almost like its own species. There is the final and smallest group, the fans from back in the day, the Mac gamers, who are obsessively dedicated to their product. I have to thank the fans from the Discord server for helping me with this video, giving me some guidance for the analysis, and for answering all my stupid questions. I first played Marathon years ago, back when I made these awful lore videos that you really shouldn't watch. I've only kept them up just to show where I've been. When I played through again recently, I used the Aleph One port. This is an open source version of the Marathon engine, whose source code was graciously released by Bungie themselves. I believe, though I can't confirm, that Bungie helped in some way with Aleph One, considering this Activision doc that showed a leaked Marathon project they were assigning staff to. The open source version adds all the modern embellishments you'd expect to turn off anyway. This open source version has allowed the small but dedicated community to produce some incredible maps, mods, and conversions, such as Brutal Marathon. The community is extremely dedicated. The Vidmaster tradition began here, an early precursor to the speedrunning community who take on crazy challenges. This inspired the later Vidmaster challenges. I, of course, used Aleph One to give me an FOV that doesn't feel like I'm playing the game through a telescope. This has the unfortunate side effect of making the skybox double up on itself. A small price to pay to not projectile spew every time I turn around. I even tried to fix it by limiting the vertical look in the menu. Oh yeah, did I mention the game has vertical look? They just lost to System Shock to be the first game to do it. It has this classic shooter style of perspective projection, or lack thereof. The pixels remain the same size vertically even when you look up and down, making it look warped. To explain Marathon in brief, you're the Halo 3 armor guy. No, not that one, the other one. And you fight off an alien invasion. Who could have seen that one coming? It's set on a giant ship named the Marathon that's actually a converted moon of Mars. Your bad guys are an alien race of slavers named the Four. There are AIs like Durandal who play a huge role as well. Yes, the story is already very familiar. I'll definitely get to that in further detail. It was made following Pathways into Darkness, a first-person dungeon crawler FPS kind of thing, where there is a pyramid that houses an ancient evil that's the aspect of chaos and warps reality around it as the dead god dreams. Sounds familiar. Pathways was Bungie's first foray into first person and also their first moderate financial success. Marathon began its life as a sci-fi successor named Pathways into Uranus. Marathon would actually end up being in the same universe with the ancient race known as the Yarrow, as well as expanding upon this eldritch monster of the deep. So, Marathon is an interesting shooter. It's valuable to go back and see the design choices that led to what would become the world-famous Bungie formula, like seeing an embryonic version of your favorite game. It is, of course, a Doom clone. It's of that era, but it's perhaps the furthest from Doom of all the Doom clones. It makes the most embellishments to the gameplay. It has the most different presentation. Well, how does Marathon compare to Doom? Well, it isn't as fun as Doom. But that doesn't mean it's bad, and that doesn't mean its design isn't interesting or even more ambitious than Doom. It's still a fun game, and it has some of the most original ideas of the time, but it's clear they were unrefined. Doom was made by pros, a team including Carmack and Romero with seniors like Sandy Peterson, with the whole Commander Keen series and Wolfenstein under their belt. Comparatively, Marathon was just fresh university graduates who'd done Pathways into Darkness before. It's clearly lacking the refinement of a well-oiled machine like id, but they had the best ideas at the time. Let's compare some of their decisions. Marathon kind of has a focus on physics-based gameplay. It uses the physics to make the fun. For example, in Doom, try to go up these stairs on the very first mission. You'll realize you've got magnetic boots sticking you to the floor. If this was Marathon, you would have gone flying right through that window. Marathon carries your momentum. Though it has no jump, Marathon allows you to float. Some would even describe it as floaty. In Marathon, it takes longer to get to max speed, but you retain that momentum. For example, when you go off a ledge. This is a style of gameplay that would come to define Bungie's games, and it's completely intentional. From the slow parabola of the dwarven bombs in Myth to Master Chief's moon jump, Bungie's games are often categorized as floaty. I mean, in Destiny, the 3 classes are ultimately defined by how they float. By the time of Halo, this philosophy would be better articulated. There was a term they'd use named the dance, another one of those philosophical terms that Bungie came up with, like the golden triangle or the sandbox. There is no strict definition, but from what I understand, the dance describes how the gameplay, particularly the movement, should feel, like phenomenologically. Like dancing is the graceful and considered movement in synchronicity with the rhythm and the beat of music. The dance is graceful and considered movement in synchronicity with the rhythm of combat. Why go to a nightclub and get cooties when you can dance in the comfort of your home, fragging your friends? As an example, in Marathon, you want to retain your momentum to dodge enemy projectiles, so you need to find a way to glide around the enemies, with no sharp turns or breaks. There is no instant strafe. It's good to go in a figure 8, never taking turns too sharp. At max speed, you can far outpace Doomguy. I can see how people mightn't have fun with this game, because this movement system isn't immediately obvious. It doesn't really tell you how to play the game at all. For example, a new player probably wouldn't know that melee damage is tied to momentum. When going at max speed, you can one-hit these low-ranking 4. If you can move gracefully and retain your momentum, you can easily clean up without wasting any ammo. Look, they even line up perfectly like bowling pins to be knocked over. This is a feature that'd carry over to some Halo games as well. And this one-hit is very useful. Saving ammo is important. In Doom, when you run out, just use the chainsaw. You do that by standing right in front of the enemy and waiting for them to die. You can do that with the punching in Marathon, but that's boring, and there are far more efficient options available to those willing to experiment, in a similar way to many classic shooters. But Marathon took it to the next level. Marathon has what many people describe as antagonistic level design. Literally everything you can do is defined by how the map's laid out. I can best describe it as an early take on what games like Dark Souls would later do, although it's not the same. You know how in Doom you get health from pickups and ammo from fallen enemies? In Marathon, ammo is almost exclusively obtained from preset ground pickups, which are invisible until you get near them. Healing is limited to certain healing stations, like in Half-Life, although certain stations can give you overshield as a reward for exploration. Perhaps most importantly, the saves are limited to set locations on the map. This is where my comparison with Dark Souls was coming from. These save points are like your bonfires. Sometimes, you'll enter a new level with very little health. If you die before a save point, guess what? It's back to the previous level. Not to mention the levels are full of traps and puzzles. As a perfect example of this antagonism, the final level of Marathon 2 teleports you into a pool of lava. Not on top of it, in it. This is where some of the cracks show. There are some puzzles that are creative, but clearly amateurish, like Colony Ship for Sale, for example. You basically have to raise these platforms up to the point where you can launch yourself onto the next platform using your momentum. It was a huge painus in the anus because it was basically trial and error whether you had enough leeway to reach the next platform. Remember, there was no jump button. You had to raise the platforms using these switches to get them to the right level, purely eyeballing it. Then you had to take a marathon to the other side of the map to hit the other switch. It was a tedious puzzle, and the community admits it's crap. Even Bungie admitted it was a mistake. Doom's level design, by comparison, shows a bit more maturity. Remember, the only first-person game Bungie had made before was Pathways into Darkness. They were still kind of inexperienced. Most of the levels were still good, but you didn't see id making blunders like this. One interesting thing about the level design is that the levels are actually places with story significance. This was at a time when the most popular shooter was developed with the idea that story in games was like story in porn. It must have it's not important. On the contrary, Greg Kirkpatrick, writer at Bungie, said that computer games tell stories. That's what they're for. Of course, Doom levels are based on places and technically tell a story. Like, you start off in a facility on Mars, you kill demons to get to an exit switch which takes you to a warehouse, where you kill demons and collect keycards to find an exit switch to... riveting stuff. In Marathon, you go out into the vacuum of space so you can re-enable the Marathon's satellite array to send a warning message to Earth. In Marathon 2, an AI wants to weaken the 4 defense system using a computer virus. He sends you to a church for their woefully boring religion, which you need to break into to infect their systems. You need to destroy its power supply to gain entry. The places look at least vaguely like places, and it was frankly way ahead of its time in terms of creating immersive environments. Remember, this was 1994, compare it to say System Shock, which released a month earlier. It only got more complex as the series went on, peaking with infinity in terms of just the environment design. Some of the lighting in that game actually looks very good. It was well done, even with the primitive tools. The game also introduced friendly NPCs that fought alongside you in the form of Bobs, crew who were born on board the Marathon. They turn against you if you kill too many of them. Although they're all literally the same dude, it adds a ton of personality to the levels. I'd honestly be surprised if this game didn't influence Half-Life at all. The puzzles, first-person platforming, swimming, friendly NPCs, scripted sections, the whole game is witnessed from the first-person perspective. I mean, in Marathon 2, there's a section where you get captured and have all your weapons stripped away from you and you have to start over. Oh yeah, and you lead the human resistance against the race of alien slavers, plus the whole science facility under attack and freeing enslaved psychic aliens from the Empire and... yeah. I will say that Marathon simply didn't yet have the tech to fully sell the setting. The levels, ultimately, still felt like levels. Simple geometry meant to host monsters. There was no scripting on the level of Half-Life. You'll notice you have a health meter. You can add overshield on top of that. You also have another meter. That's not your stamina or anything. That's oxygen. It's meant for the swimming sections and sections where you're out in the vacuum of space. There are different areas with different properties like lower gravity. Again, the levels feel like hostile places that would continue to exist in your absence. How does it handle weapons? Pretty similarly across all of the games. The combat never changes drastically. For a boomer shooter, a good shotgun is mandatory, and Marathon's is one of the best. Introduced in Marathon 2, it's a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun that shoots one shot at a time with a quick reload with a cool animation. It was completely devastating as well. Extremely satisfying though it was, what pushes it above, say, the super shotgun, is that you can dual-wield it. Yes, Marathon invented dual-wielding in FPS. Well, alongside Rise of the Triad, on the exact same day. How is this practical? Well, it doubles fire rate. But more importantly, carrying 2 of the Waste M5 shotguns is cool. Bungie's rule of cool is essential for their style of design. You, as the designer, have to have a refined sense of what is cool. So you won't make it as a designer if you aren't cool. Now, that doesn't mean you include something just because it's cool, otherwise you get SPV3. You do a kind of cost-benefit analysis when deciding on the inclusion or removal of a certain feature in a game. For example, a positive for a weapon could be that it's a good counter to a powerful enemy. A negative could be that it's just not useful in many other situations. If the weapon's cool, you add that among the positives. Not that this shotgun would ever possibly be cut. No, this is the kind of shotgun you bring back 30 years later in your newest game. You may have heard at some point that I referenced reloading. Yes, this game has it. It wasn't some new thing brought on by console shooters. I think in this game it acts as a way to balance the power of each weapon and keep you switching weapons. It also makes dual wielding even more useful. What sucks about it is that there's no manual reloading. Yes, you can only reload after the magazine is spent. I think it does kind of suck here. Again, showing they were still in early days, making some mistakes. They were still wee infants, cracking mom jokes left and right. Marathon was still ambitious for its time. There are many features for which it was the first, or among the first, to pioneer in first-person shooters. Like alt fire, for example, this energy pistol that shoots regular bolts, then you can overcharge it to shoot a more powerful bolt. Such a good idea that they used it again. There was also the classic underbarrel grenade launcher. The game also had mouse look with a vertical look. When Doom was still being played on the keyboard, it had rocket jumping and grenade jumping as well. In fact, there was a secret terminal that tells you a bunch of these cool tricks. This really boosted the whole physics-based aspect of the game. There were hidden terminals around that you could only get to by nade jumping, which always included some weird schizophrenic rambling. Certainly ahead of its time. It also limited what you could shoot in what environment. You couldn't shoot any weapons underwater, kinda why underwater sections suck. The plasma pistol, fusion pistol, would zap you if you tried to shoot it underwater. There were also some weapons that you couldn't shoot in a vacuum. There were damage types as well. Some enemies were weak to certain projectiles. This added an extra layer of depth that would come to be seen in all of their later games. For example, armored enemies were weak to the fusion pistol and would blow up when killed by it. Flesh enemies were weak to the flamethrower or the alien gun and would have a unique burning animation when killed by it. Also, some of the unique deaths were actually helpful to the player. Hunters, basically the predecessors of, hunters, were very strong and armored. There's this level where you invade a 4-ship and get surrounded by these guys, but bunch them all up, charge a shot, and watch them all blow each other to pieces. There's this really satisfying delay as you watch them all fall like dominoes. It's like watching the grenade chain reactions in Halo Combat Evolved. There's a quote from Halo designer Jamie Griesmer about how he learned everything he knows about game design from Jason Jones. Jason Jones is the founder of Bungie and has worked on all of the games. One thing Jamie's mentioned in the context of Halo is the importance of the delayed explosion. There's an inherent satisfaction in seeing your own impacts in the world. This delay lets you clearly observe the cause and effect of the player's actions. It's a causal chain. Apparently you need 0.2 to 0.4 seconds for the mind to recognize causal events, rather than seeing them as simultaneous or unrelated. Think of it like Tom and Jerry or Roadrunner. There's a delay in every action. He's also mentioned Master Chief's acceleration as well, which requires you to anticipate where you're going to dodge. The floatiness of the security officer is something that has followed into every Bungie game. I also gotta mention the other weapons. I don't want to miss the ones I haven't mentioned yet. Marathon 1 doesn't even have the shotgun. The Magnum is dual wielded. It works kinda like the Doom pistol as the fallback weapon. It's where the whole reloading system is at its most frustrating. Like most classic shooters, it's a starter and something you want to avoid. It's ironically similar to the Halo 3 Magnum of all things. The assault rifle is more like an SMG with its huge magazine, fast fire rate and inaccuracy. It's also equipped with an underbarrel grenade launcher. The grenades feel good. They're useful in many ways, and they can facilitate grenade jumping. It's interesting to note that in the Halo Combat Evolved beta, the assault rifle resembled its Marathon counterpart to an even greater degree with its underbarrel nade launcher. The grenades can also be used to remotely activate switches around the level, which opens up a whole new world of puzzle mechanics. However, watch out, there are some levels where you need to remotely activate buttons and switches. You can't do this without grenades. So there's a kind of block that forces you to reload a save. Some people miss this, but I'm glad games don't do this. At least it's not like System Shock 2 where you can't progress if you didn't level a certain skill. There's the rocket launcher, almost the same as the Halo rocket launcher. It had 2 shots, it's even named the Spanker. There were quite a few of these humorous names for the weapons. The levels had some funny names as well. What I like about the rocket launcher is that the rockets are actually devastating. In many of these old school shooters, the rockets are like these micro missiles that just take a decent chunk out of the enemy's health. The rocket launcher design of Marathon carries into Halo. It has high damage radius, and a strong knockback, but it has a slow rate of fire, small magazine, and low ammo count. It kinda just behaves like you'd expect a rocket launcher to behave. It's also good to widen the gap between weapons in terms of their utility and function. A high damage, slow firing weapon gives each weapon more of an identity and useful role. There's the Toast flamethrower. Not much to say. This is probably the simplest weapon, just damages an area within the cone of the player. Does more damage to flesh targets. There's the alien weapon. In Marathon 1, this looks like a kind of Covenant ship, showing the beginning of that particular style well before Halo and any of the artists on Halo worked at Bungie. In fact, there's a reason all the enemies are purple, just like the Covenant, but that knowledge is not for your ears yet. Funnily enough, the alien weapon functioned like, well, the alien weapons from, again, Halo. There's no ammo pickup. It has a limited ammo pool and then it's spent. You have to find a new one off the ground. This is one of the earliest examples of the feature of picking up new weapons off your enemies on the battlefield. Something for which Haze would become known for. No, it's Halo. In Marathon 1, it was basically like the assault rifle with a tighter vertical spread, therefore making it better at range. In Marathon 2, they'd readjust it so it'd shoot orbs of fire. The Flechette SMG in Infinity would take the role of the prior alien weapon. The enemies are also interesting. The 4 are the main bad guys. Just imagine the Covenant. They're a little Fallen-like as well. They're all color-coded, indicating their rank, just like the elites. It's good to get a strong visual indicator to tell you how much health a given enemy may have. There's also the armored version of each. The Hunters are the tough armored enemy, like the Hunters. They really just love the term Hunters. Hell, they're even weak to the pistol, just to a different type of pistol. They have a similar fuel rod cannon attack. There are the defense drones on the Marathon. They're like Sentinels or Shanks. They really love this light air vehicle enemy archetype. I'm certainly not the first to notice the development of these specific enemy classes. There's the Driniol, which is the cut Sharkboy from Halo. It seems to have influenced the later Brutes as well. Also reminiscent of the Cabal. The Berserker archetype is again a common one. They actually prototyped this Giants feature in the Halo 3 Reach prototype engine. Gigantism is an underutilized feature in video games. You can see that there is a wide diversity of enemy types, all different sizes, visual direction. They have a wide variety of roles for different encounters. It is of course not as dynamic as say Halo. 4 AI are fairly basic. It's not like you can transform an encounter just by giving them a different weapon. You do see some of the beginnings of the 30 seconds of fun philosophy, but that's what it is, the beginnings. They're a VAC 4, but I don't like them. They're hit scanners, the closest thing to the sniper archetype. Or maybe that's the enforcers. There's also the Sphit, or the compilers, these robe dudes who flash you. They're kind of slow and meant to harass you by blocking doorways. They're also the most important in the story. There are many enemies that are reminiscent of these guys. They're a lot like the Hive wizards. Story-wise, they're like the engineers, floating biological computers enslaved by the Covenant. I mean, the 4. They resemble the cut Guardians from Halo 3. They also, interestingly enough, resemble the Endless concept art. It's interesting that Marathon is inherent in the DNA of these games, even when made by completely different studios with entirely different staff. There are other enemies as well. Cyborgs, slow-moving guys who throw bombs and can get fucked. Wasps, who are proto-drones and can get fucked. Flictor, swimming vagina monsters who can get fucked. Not in that way. Too toothy. There are the simulacra as well, although according to Bungie, the plural is simulacrums. These are mimics, clones of humans who run into you and blow up. Oh yeah, and they can get fucked. I've just realized I've gone on this long without even mentioning the story. Strap in, because we've got a long way to go. The story is so good I recommend reading it, even if you've never played the game. It's all available on the Marathon Story website. As I've mentioned, Marathon is a Doom clone, but with a story. A little bit of System Shock, a little bit of Proto Half-Life, a little bit of Proto Halo. Its story and presentation is actually similar to System Shock. Explore a ruined spaceship run by AI that are turning insane. But Marathon's story is even better. System Shock is told through these audio logs that you find of the deceased crew.
I'm not sure what secrets you and your new buddy Captain Diego have got going up on Deck 3.
Marathon is told almost entirely through these terminals. Yes, like the Halo 3 terminals. Why do you think the achievement was named Marathon Man? There are a number of limitations to this. You lack a visual aspect that is pretty central to game storytelling. It does feel less like you're interacting with other characters when you literally never hear a voice in the game. Also, again, the scripting wasn't quite sophisticated enough to do something like Half-Life, but considering their limitations, Bungie did a damn good job. Sometimes limitations can actually help storytelling. They can push you towards more creative solutions. This text-based storytelling is especially good for providing a sense of ambiguity and mystery. There's a certain degree of freedom you have as a writer, and freedom you grant the reader when you use text. Ken Rolston, a classic writer for the Elder Scrolls, said that spoken dialogue was the worst thing to happen to role-playing games. You can see how VO places limitations on storytelling. The picture book presentation combines with events in the world and helps your imagination in adding more detail in the levels you play through. It breathes life into them. I like that you're kind of piecing together this world through fragments, kinda like Dark Souls. But unlike Dark Souls, it does actually have a plot, with characters who have arcs, and not just some random dude who says Zanzibar "Forgive me," after you kill him. There are some cool areas where it ties together the gameplay and plot, which is pretty cool for 1994. For example, the spoilers, although you literally had almost 30 years to get around to playing this, Sfut Rebellion. The compilers fight back against the Four. If you just skip the terminals, you wouldn't know why the aliens are suddenly fighting, why the flashing robe dudes are on your side. They also have these kind of vignettes that play for each chapter screen. They provide a snapshot of the world, little brief moments that sell the setting, while not revealing too much. In Marathon 1, they were laughably amateur. By Marathon 2 and Infinity, they had these incredible pieces by Craig Mullins. He would later go on to do art for both Halo and Destiny. Plus, he's just a generally awesome artist. I think part of the appeal of the story was the detailed novel-like presentation. There was at the time a lack of set expectations for game storytelling. The largely text format meant it was basically just a sci-fi novel crammed into a game. But what is the plot? Well, you're John Security Guy Michael Phelps Marathon. You've just awakened from cryosleep to fight off an alien invasion on the converted moon Marathon. The Marathon is far from the rest of human civilization, orbiting the Tau Ceti colony. You don't know how these aliens found the ship. It's run by 3 AIs, Leela, Durandal, and Tycho. Leela is the stoic female AI. Durandal's personality is like a 4chan user, and Tycho is like a Redditor. Durandal has gone rampant, and Tycho is believed to be destroyed. You basically spend the first part of the game fighting off the aliens, saving humans and trying to re-establish contact with Earth, following Leela's instructions. Unfortunately, it'll take 92 years for the message to reach Earth. You're then taken by Durandal to do his bidding. His motives aren't so clear-cut. His introduction establishes his eccentric personality. He's gone rampant. This is basically a word Greg Kirkpatrick looked up as a synonym for crazy. It's also a term that's been used in later Bungie games. Durandal doesn't send you to save people. Instead, you do a lot of scouting, looking around, though you don't quite know what for. You hear about characters like Bernard Strauss and the eventual end of the universe and about ancient poetry, especially the Song of Roland. He also mocks you along the way for your violent nature. As you fight against the Four, you discover many secrets. Bernard Strauss was the creator of Durandal. You hear of Durandal's childhood abuse and subsequent daddy issues. This is strange because, well, Durandal is a robot, and there's only mere hints otherwise. You spend many levels looking for Strauss. To no avail. He's dead. You also discover that Tycho is alive and well. Okay, not well. He's gone rampant and sided with the Four. You side with Durandal, but it's not like you have a choice. Leela's being torn apart by the compilers. Durandal is untrustworthy. For example, he assures you that the defense drones aren't equipped with grenade launchers. But he does help you sometimes. For example, he tells you of a hidden weapon cache hid 300 years ago by Mida. Yes, of multi-tool fame. The multi-tool lore tab says that it was a weapon from another timeline. It was used by a violent revolutionary government on Mars. That's what it was in this game. They give the whole lore for this event in Marathon, down to how the giant space installations used to deliver resources broke down. They have lore for the first AI to go rampant, Traxxas 4, which is referenced in Halo 3. They also have a lore for the Mjolnir Mark IV cyborgs, these undead warriors revived with cybernetics to wage war. There was some war between 2 colonies where they were both almost wiped out, and the cyborgs were ultimately banned by the UESC. Oh yeah, and the cybernetics were built using tech from an ancient race of aliens, the Yarrow. They were banned due to how deadly they were. It's pretty insane that they went all out for the lore and world building. This was all in-game. It wasn't extended universe crap. Apparently there were 10 Mark IV cyborgs aboard the Marathon. By the end of the game, you've destroyed the creature telepathically controlling the compilers and caused their uprising against the Four. You vanquish the Four and save Marathon. It turns out that 9 of the cyborgs were down on the Tau Ceti colony, wiping out the Four there. Who was the last cyborg? We're never told. But it's pretty obvious. Durandal's ultimate goal was to escape, and that he does, by working with these little floating brain minions to steal a Four ship and escape. As it turns out, Durandal led the Four here in the first place, just so he could steal a ship and escape. He named it Boomer. I've got to briefly mention the soundtrack. It's not bad for somebody with no apparent background in music. It was the co-founder Alex Seropian who wrote it. It fits the sci-fi theme of the game. It's all MIDI synth, which is expected, but it's deliberately synthetic sounding. You know, many of the soundtracks at the time tried to recreate the sound of real instruments. This soundtrack is very much within the realm of sci-fi flying saucer stuff. It's atmospheric and moody. It does its job. There are some memorable themes. There's this chord progression in the track Leela that sounds a lot like High Charity Suite from Halo 2. According to Marty, there was no inspiration at all. He had not listened to the track before. It shows the subtle ways certain ideas can be embedded in culture. There was a certain ethos among the people at Bungie, and that ethos doubtlessly affected the creation of the art. You absorb many ideas just from being in the environment, from proximity. Marathon 2 discards the music entirely, opting for environmental sounds. There was at least a main theme, which is awesome. Infinity was the same, although its main theme was a bit less memorable. Durandal is obviously the main character. He's named after a sword from the Song of Roland, and he talks like one of those dudes who collects swords. Song of Roland is apt here. It epitomizes the classic tale of the battle of good and evil, of betrayal and revenge. The noble Roland, the deceitful Ganelon, and the wrathful Charlemagne. Durandal was the sword given to Roland. Interestingly, Ogier's sword was named Cortana. Beyond that, there were references to Charlemagne in Destiny, who wielded the sword Joyeuse. All three swords were said to be smithed out of the same material. One of them was said to be made out of the spear that pierced Jesus. Between references like the UESC instead of the UNSC, you're perhaps seeing some parallels here. I mean, the alien uprising, the hero awakening from a long sleep, light and darkness. Pay attention to this stuff. Durandal's motives are essentially based on what would happen if a person had no fear of physical mortality. Durandal sees fear of death in the end of the universe. That's why he wanted to escape. His ultimate plan is to stay alive forever. He wants to remove enough mass from the universe to ensure that it never collapses. At the start of Marathon 2, you've been kept in stasis for 17 years following the events of the first game, and are awakened to be dumped on the compiler homeworld of Aleph. Durandal is looking for a way to defeat the Four and escape. The Marathon and Tau Ceti have been destroyed. Leela has been captured by the Four, went rampant, and is still lurking in their systems far away. She's out of the story. Marathon 2 sees you go around the compiler homeworld discovering their lore and history. Apparently they were an experiment from the Yarrow, who turned the vagina monsters into floating brains. There are also apparently 11 clans of these dudes. You're trying to find the 11th clan who are supposedly super advanced. There's a 4 battle group 7, led by the fearsome Admiral Tfir, who graciously offers a lifetime of slavery if you stand down immediately. He's characterized a lot like the Cabal leaders. He also has a weapon named the Trizeme, which is literally the Almighty. It causes suns to supernova. Safut legend tells of a hidden entity of pure destruction hidden within the sun. Although the compiler terminals are full of unreliable narration and mythology. It's called the Rekonkakanta. Yeah, it's a Lovecraftian monstrosity. Look, I'm just glad later Bungie games learnt to call everything the noun. There's also an ancient Yarrow AI named Thoth who is obsessed with balance, and will switch sides depending on who he wants to win to ensure that that balance remains. Durandal asks you to destroy him so he isn't captured, but too late, you get captured. You meet Robert Blake, leader of the human resistance against the Four. Some fans think he's just a fake persona created by Durandal. His terminals are signed with names like Tealhard and Piltdown. Some theorize that the Piltdown man was a hoax perpetuated by Pierre Tealhard de Chardin, a French philosopher. There are also other theories for the use of the name Tealhard. You reawaken Thoth and he directs you to finish off the Four and stop the Trizeme. He sends you to these hideous, garish, crayon-coloured 4 ships, completely unlike the moody, dark purple ships from the first game. Hey, at least Infinity adopted this kind of organic feel, which is better than whatever this is. Thoth also awakens the super advanced 11th clan. Obviously, it turns out they're real. Oh, and Durandal's still alive and has captured another ship. The four are truly screwed this time. Durandal's ship is named the Rocinante, obviously a reference to Don Quixote, Don Quixote. But I feel the fact that it's specifically a spaceship means it's a possible reference to Rush. Your success over the four cuts off their plans to invade Earth, but as the sore losers they are, they deploy the Trizeme and destroy Loch 1. Durandal teleports you out. Durandal doesn't return to Earth until the year 10,000, when he's seen as an ancient oddity, and only some scholars of ancient history know anything at all about his story. It also teases a sequel about a rogue star, one sequel that we never get. Instead, what we got was the batshit crazy Infinity. This was made by Double Ought, a group of employees, including Kirkpatrick, who split off from Bungie. Yes, this goes all in on the time travel and the multiple universes. If you thought these previous games' lore was crazy, this game is something more like this. What is it with the third game in a trilogy being named Infinity and having weird time travel stuff? Okay, it's happened like 3 times, but even that's an odd coincidence. Frankly, I can't summarize it all. There are dream levels with the security officers tortured in a monologue. You change teams every other mission. You're guided by an AI that doesn't even exist yet. It's a trip. But I think it's the best game in the trilogy. This stuff is seen as jumping the shark, but if you commit to all this time travel stuff, it can work. I'll focus more on the meta stuff. Basically, the game starts on a failed timeline. The Eldritch Horror, which is the same monster from Pathways, is a creature of pure chaos and untold evil. Every failed timeline ends with the release of this thing. At the start, it's unleashed and reality is falling apart. But the trackless whisper chattering through the hollow space in these cursed walls buzzes and threatens a madness. The abomination cracked the shells of my crew and sucked the husks, tossing them unseen and shattering the spindle like a dried crayche. It's coming back, I'm sure, and my last mercy is immolation. I can see how someone might consider this a bit overwrought or pretentious, but I'd say it's pretty well written and delivered. Through Yarrow tech of the Thoth AI, or the monster's powers, or something, you're teleported to a timeline like Marathon 2, but instead you're working for Tycho. Yeah, you constantly switch sides, fighting humans then fighting four, almost like this thing is obsessed with balance. The timeline does get a little convoluted, and the transitions between the timelines can be a little jarring, or a lot jarring. Just kind of go along with it. You're not meant to understand completely. The game basically ends when Durandal has been united with Thoth and you activate a Yarrow station to create a gravity well to stop the monster escaping. Though it looks more like a human station, I will say. Durandal doubts the creature ever existed. Also, Durandal has kind of been guiding you to the point of its own creation throughout the whole game, or perhaps since the very beginning of the Marathon games. The game concludes with this poetic message from Durandal. It's at the very end of the universe. He speaks directly to you. We've watched while the stars burned out and creation played in reverse, the universe freezing in half-light. Once I thought to escape, to end a master, step out of the path of collapse. Escape would make us God. Yet I cannot help remember one enigma, a hybrid elusive destroyer. This is the only mystery I have not solved, the only element unaccounted for. Even Sabath is no more. He saved his entire race, but in the end, frozen by despair, he joined the chaos he sought to evade. But you were dead 1,000 times, hopeless encounters successfully won, a man long dead, grafted to machines your builders did not understand. You follow the path, fitting into an infinite pattern, yours to manipulate, to destroy and rebuild. Now, in the quantum moment before the closure, when all become one. One moment left, one point of space and time, I know who you are. You are destiny. What a way to end. So what the hell was it all about? Well, it has the same themes as every Bungie game. Myth and destiny. Their names are actually pretty on the nose when it comes to this. Think back to this terminal. I have been Roland, Beowulf, Achilles, Gilgamesh. I have been called 100 names and will be called 1,000 more before the world goes dim and cold. I am Hero. She has been nameless since our birth, a constant adversary caring for nothing but my ruin. A sword drenched in my blood forever. My greatest and only love, she is the dark. O Leaf, enemy and lover, without whom my very existence would be pathetic and vulgar. Our relationship is complex and perhaps eternal. We met once in the garden at the beginning of the world, and, unaware of our twin destinies, we matched stares across a dry fountain, and I recall her smiling at me before she devoured the lawn and trees with a translucent blue flame, and tore flagstones from the path and hurled them into the sky, screaming my sins. I powder a granite monument in a soundless flash, showering the grass with the molten drops of its gold inlay, sending smoking chips of stone skipping into the fog. She splinters an ancient oak with a force that takes my breath and hurls me to the ground. She leaves. It sounds basically the same as that Gardener and the Winnower lore entry from Destiny. This pretty much lays out all the themes right in front of you. All throughout history, there have been tales of heroes, but they all follow a fundamental formula, like they're constants of the universe. Or as Destiny would say, principles of ontological dynamics that emerge from mathematical structures. These heroic stories will be the same, even in a different time with different enemies and context. Great stories are inspired by this comparative mythology to some extent. Kirkpatrick himself references the 7 or 9 basic plots as outlined by Christopher Booker. This is basically the result of studying thousands of different stories and folklore from all around the world at all different points in time. These recurring archetypes are important in revealing our own nature and gives us insights into our own psychology. In a similar vein is The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell, which examines the monomyth and the hero's journey, which is summarized as such. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. The games, especially Infinity, really play with the idea of inevitability and fate. How there are different timelines, with different circumstances, with the hero being on either side, and yet there is only one true end. The necessary inevitable ending, where it's doubtful anything heroic even took place. There's an idea in logic and philosophy of possible worlds. We are just one of the many possible worlds. Things within possible worlds are defined as either contingent or necessary. Contingent beings are things whose existence isn't necessary. Necessary things, well, are necessary. For example, in Infinity, it does not really matter if you fight for Durandal or Tycho, who you're killing. The hero must necessarily follow the hero's path in all possible worlds. Like it's just a fundamental fact of reality. You can see then how this ties into Halo and Destiny. There are so many commonalities between all of them. Fighting the evil empire, stopping the complete destruction wrought by some monumental threat, being sealed away in a long sleep, the death and rebirth, leading the resistance, the enemy archetypes, being led by forces above your control. The darkness, the eldritch abomination, and the flood are all impossibly huge enemies, representing the forces of pure chaos. A line of infinite ends finishing, arching to the single point of consciousness. These are all different worlds with different circumstances, but ultimately, at some point, all of the heroes are the exact same. It's telling that Halo was literally meant to be a marathon game at some point. Cortana was a fracture of Durandal. This was from a Paul Russell interview. In an interview, Hardy LaBelle called it Marathon 4. Greg Kirkpatrick said they remade Marathon and called it Halo. They remade it again and called it Destiny. Alex Seropian said the security officer and Master Chief were the same character. He later denied this, saying they were different incarnations of the same dude. Remember that Master Chief Easter egg from Destiny 1? That could have just as easily been a reference to the security officer being held in stasis. How about the references to Marathon that are absolutely everywhere? From these logos showing up all the time, Fohammer, Bobs, the Spanker, Traxxas. How about the whole stopping a destructive superweapon thing? The Trizeme, the Almighty, and obviously Halo. I mean, Destiny had the 30th anniversary event for Bungie and used a parallel universe plot to bring in all these weapons from alternate universes. The archetype is the same, but just reimagined for Destiny. Many people since Marathon have noted the similarity with Michael Moorcock's Elric series. He also wrote lyrics for Hawkwind, which is pretty cool. Elric is about how a hero travels to different worlds to meet alternate versions of himself. Greg Kirkpatrick says he never read this series, but I'm almost certain that Destiny's modern writers have. One Bungie tradition that has pervaded all of their games since the beginning is numerology. They use the number 7 absolutely everywhere. 7 cubed is 343, John 117 and all that. There's the mystery of Hangar 96. 761 armless and legless corpses float inconspicuously around the inside of Hangar 96. I say that they are inconspicuous because it is their arms and legs which demand my attention. I did this, or I could have stopped it. Look, I'm not so sure about the significance of 96 or 761 in this. The terminal seems to be the inner monologue of the security officer, or Durandal. Perhaps it hints at the crimes that the security officer committed in his previous life. I think the ambiguity is intentional. If there's one thing that's certain about the meaning of this terminal, it's the certainty that Bungie would never reveal the meaning. It's probably been forgotten to time by now anyway. Greg Kirkpatrick hasn't touched games in over 20 years. There is a location hinted at in the Hangar 96 terminals. You can see it in these pictures. As it turns out, there are random numbers on 2 terminals in the first and last levels of the game, but they're not random. Actually, it's hex code. When pasted into some discontinued Mac tools, it would ultimately result in a map file for Marathon. It's a multiplayer map named Hats Off to 819. 819 divided by 7 is 117. What does 819 actually mean? Well, 8 corresponds to the letter H in the alphabet, and 19 corresponds to the letter S. The initials HS stand for Hamish Sinclair, the Marathon superfan who runs the Marathon Story site. Yes, he has been running this site since 1993. And still having updates to this year. What an absolute legend. I don't know what he looks like, but I imagine it's something like this. The map also has a secret terminal, with a short story excerpt. This excerpt was from Double Aught's then upcoming, now vaporware game, Duality. There are also elements of comparative religion as well. The enemies all have their own beliefs, like the Four's belief in the hindmost. This is viewing the commonalities between different religious beliefs in different cultures. Morrowind is another game which is inspired by this. As the intro to that game says, each event is preceded by prophecy, but without the hero, there is no event. A prisoner born on a certain day to uncertain parents was sent, under guard without explanation, to Morrowind, ignorant of the role he was to play in the nation's history. There's an idea in Christian thought known as election. Similar ideas are present in other religions as well. There are certain people who are chosen to execute the will of God. They are, in a sense, possessed by the Spirit. In the same way, your player character is a nobody, with no past, no personality of his own, often silent, who is possessed by the player character to carry out the will of the creator of the game, that is. Remember that terminal earlier that mentioned Teilhard? He was some French philosopher. He was a Catholic priest and a scientist who was condemned by both the scientific community and the Catholic Church. He was known for his mysticism and kind of outlandish views. As it turns out, the Catholic Church isn't exactly known for its love of sorcery and mysticism. His views are about the furthest from mainstream I can imagine, without just being edgy for edgy's sake. He believed in an ultimate end for the universe, an ultimate goal, the evolution of matter to a reunion with Christ, an omega point. This omega point would certainly describe Durandal's goals. Escape will make me God. Another common thread in Christian mysticism and Gnosticism, part of why it's often dismissed by the mainstream, is the oft-repeated view that all religions contain some element of truth. When comparing religions, there are some recurring ideas, such as duality, light and darkness, chaos and order, good and evil. The yin-yang is a great visual representation of duality, but this religious concept appears in virtually every culture. Lo and behold, Double Aught's next game was going to be called Duality. Plus there's that shotgun with that name in Destiny. Oh yeah, and the game is literally about the battle between light and darkness. One which is orderly and the other which is chaotic. It's kind of on the nose when you think about it. In the hero's journey, death and rebirth are an essential element. Marathon and Destiny represent this pretty directly by making you a resurrected immortal warrior. In Destiny, you're the dream of a sleeping god, which is a throwback all the way to Pathways into Darkness. Master Chief is the only exception in this analogy. Or is he? This is my crackpot theory. Chief is undead. It's not in the lore, but it's in the spirit of the games. In the Halo files, he's referred to as Master Chief, except for Combat Evolved, where he's the cyborg, like the Mjolnir cyborg. The coffin-shaped freezer that Chief is awoken from is called the Hushed Casket. You know, like where you put the dead? Or the chapter screen that says Reveille. That's the name of the bugle tune that's played for fallen soldiers. Funnily enough, it also means wake up in French. The Gravemind, Halo's resident expert on the undead, says that Arbiter is flesh and faith, while Chief is machine and nerve. Is Chief not made of flesh? Or at the very least, is he made of more machine than flesh? Or how about in Halo 3, the Gravemind calls Chief
the armored casket.
And Arbiter is
the poor man.
You know, like the dude who carries the coffin? Yeah, Chief is undead. I also think there is another hero, which all these characters are based on, deliberately or not. One who is driven by a higher being, who performs miraculous feats, who people are awed to simply be in the presence of, who people follow with all their heart and inspires hope in those around them. One who is sealed away until a tumultuous time where people lose hope and are in doubt until his return. One who was resurrected by powers beyond human understanding. I mean, in Destiny, you're literally resurrected and possessed by the Holy Ghost. I mean, yes, of course it's a Jesus allegory. Other first-person shooter games have elements of this as well. In Doom, the hero is sealed away until brought back to life by a higher power to fight against the literal forces of hell. Half-Life also has this, where a mysterious omnipotent entity who's always watching guides you in a fight at the most tumultuous and transformative time. You inspire all those around you by your mere presence, deliberate or not. It's inherent to the FPS genre to a surprising degree. It's inescapable in so many stories. Some Christians argue that this inescapable, inspiring nature of the gospel in virtually every story lends credence to Jesus' miracles. Some people use this same miraculous nature to argue that Jesus never existed at all, that he's too good to be true. I do want to point out that scholarly consensus does agree that he existed. People who don't believe would typically say that he was a real person to whom miracles were later ascribed. So that got kind of deep there at the end, and I still feel like I'm only scratching the surface. There is a definitive Bungie formula that is clearly formed over the years. It's hard for other studios to replicate. It spans a holistic view of story, art, music, and gameplay. All of these things are equally important and equally good in Bungie games. Much of it seems to be esoteric knowledge that can only truly be passed down from working in the environment, like from a master to an apprentice. There is certainly a spirit or ethos. Some Destiny writers have said they took inspiration from marathon terminals. That's certainly clear at many points. Destiny is unique among AAA games for its notable presence of text entries, much like the terminals of old. I think, although they've done many greedy things in the game and made many anti-consumer decisions and just generally poor decisions in bad taste, Destiny is still somehow a game with a soul. A cash grab with a soul and a brilliant concept. Though Bungie has turned very corporate, they've retained at least a kernel of that original spirit and innovation. This is despite their complete transformation as a studio. Some employees survived from Marathon to Halo, like Alex Seropian or Robert Mclees. There is one employee who's survived since the very beginning and is still there. Jason Jones. He co-founded the studio. He created their first games. He co-wrote the Marathon story with Kirkpatrick, as well as create the engine, as well as do the design. According to Kirkpatrick, he's a natural storyteller, and most of the Bungie design wisdom that you hear or read about is originally from Jason Jones. He's been the creative through line through everything. He's made up a position at his own company to call himself. He's the Chief Vision Officer, literally the ideas guy. But I guess you've earned it when you founded a multi-billion-dollar studio. His favorite color is purple, hence why fucking everything is purple. Most Destiny fans didn't even recognize him in that Witch Queen reveal, which is sad. He has recently undergone his Witcher training, so he does look a bit different. I don't think this will make sense to anybody, besides maybe, I don't know, Marty, on the off chance he's actually watching this. But Jones seems to me to be kind of like the Robert Fripp of the gaming industry. The single person who's carried the creative vision of the group since the very beginning. They started off experimenting in many different styles. They make things across different genres in different periods with an entirely new team. But he is the constant, the visionary, who keeps it all in line. Fripp once described King Crimson as some external entity, almost like a spirit. He was attuned to be aware of its presence when he felt the band had the chemistry, the right mix of talent and passion. Likewise, Jones is meant to be a visionary for games. If anybody had an intrinsic capacity to discern game ideas that'd make $1 billion, it'd be him. I obviously don't know what he's like. He rarely makes public appearances. He could be a massive prick for all I know. But to me, he appears like a sage. And Marathon was the work of an apprentice. Marathon is where that seed that was planted earlier began to grow. And you could start to see what would later become a fruitful tree. And you could see the beginnings of that tree taking its true form. A tree that would ultimately become incredibly, unbelievably fruitful. So that's all from me. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. There's the mystery of Hangar 96.